There are many occasions during editing that you'll need to scale, position, rotate, crop, and/or distort an image. You'll find these editing mode buttons in the lower left of the viewer. Because we enabled the transform controls in the last section, the button is already illuminated. Clicking the button will turn the transform 2D functions on or off. You know you're in the transform mode when blue dots appear around the image. The middle button reveals the crop mode. You know you're in this mode when a dashed outline appears around the image. Within the crop mode are 3 different crop functions: trim, crop, and Ken Burns, but more on these later. The third button reveals the distort mode. You know you're in this mode when blue squares appear around the image. You can also enable these modes by right-clicking on the image. Select Transform or press Shift-T. There are 2 ways you can transform an image, either directly in the viewer or in the inspector. The most intuitive method is directly in the viewer. To scale the image, simply drag on a control point. As you drag, the scale percentage appears in the upper left of the viewer. You can also position the image by placing your mouse pointer anywhere in the frame, then clicking and dragging it to a new location. If you want dynamic alignment guides to appear as you drag, click and drag from the center target called the anchor point. There's also a blue rotation handle for rotating the image around its anchor point. As you rotate, the amount of rotation in degrees appears in the upper left of the viewer. To reset the transforms to their defaults, click the Reset button at the far right of the word Transform in the inspector. As I mentioned, you can also transform the image in the inspector. Click the Show Text to reveal the transform controls. To move the image, drag on the X and Y position hot scrubbers. Obviously, you can also rotate and scale the image, but more significantly, you can enter precise values to control the transforms. Enter 90 for rotation and press Return. Reset the transform properties by clicking the hooked arrow. The inspector also gives you the ability to move the anchor point of the image, which is something you cannot do directly in the viewer. The anchor point by default is the center of the image, represented visually by this target circle. All transformations happen around the anchor point. Drag upward on the Y anchor scrubber until the target cross is aligned with the top of the frame. Now, whenever you rotate or scale the image, the transforms are applied to the new anchor point location. Click Reset to return the transform controls to their defaults. You can also animate the transform controls. Let's set up a simple animation where this photo animates in from the right side of the frame. In the timeline, move the playhead to the beginning of the clip. In the inspector, drag upward on the X position scrubber until the image is completely outside the frame. To set the first keyframe for position, click the diamond at the far right of the position property. When a keyframe has been created, the diamond turns red with an orange outline. If your playhead is parked on a keyframe and you move your mouse pointer over it, a red X will appear, letting you know that if you click again, you'll delete it. Let's delete this keyframe. The other way to create keyframes is by using the keyframe overlay in the upper left of the viewer. If you click this diamond, keyframes are created for all the transform properties in the inspector, not just a single property. This method is useful when you know you'll be animating more than one transform. Again, if your playhead is parked on a keyframe, the diamond will appear with an X, indicating you can delete the keyframes by clicking. Now move your playhead to 7 seconds by pressing Ctrl-P, entering 700 and pressing Return. In the inspector, click the keyframe diamond next to Position to create a second keyframe. Enter 0 in the X position input field and press Return. In the viewer, a dashed red line appears to indicate the animation path or trajectory. Click the Previous Edit button at the bottom of the viewer to return the playhead to the beginning of the clip and play back the animation. Very nice. To view the keyframes you created on the clip itself, make sure the clip is selected, then press Ctrl-V. The 2 keyframes we set appear on the blue transform bar as tiny diamonds. However, if you look closely, you'll notice that the first keyframes appear as two stacked diamonds, and the second keyframe appears with one. Whenever you see stacked keyframes, this means that more than one property has keyframes applied at that location. You'll recall, we used the viewer overlay to create the first keyframe, which set keyframes for all the transform properties, and for the second keyframe, we created only a position keyframe in the inspector, which explains why there's only a single diamond. To navigate to keyframes, click the arrows on the viewer overlay. When you're parked on the first keyframe, the diamond will appear red with an orange outline. In the inspector, remove the keyframes for rotation, scale, and anchor point, then notice on the clip timing bar, the keyframe is now represented by a single diamond. To change the speed of the animation, click and drag the second keyframe to the left to reduce the distance between them, then play the clip back to see the change. Conversely, you can drag the keyframe in the opposite direction if you wanted to slow down the speed of the animation. You can also make changes to the motion path. Move your playhead between the first and second keyframe. In the viewer, click and drag downward on the anchor point target. Because the playhead was positioned between two existing keyframes, a middle keyframe was automatically created and the path shape becomes a curve. If you right-click on the target, you can change the path interpolation from smooth to linear. Choosing linear makes the speed of the image coming into and out of the second keyframe consistent, producing a very mechanical motion effect. Choosing smooth will allow you to change the speed coming into and out of the keyframe using Bezier curves. You can adjust the shape of the curves by dragging on the curve handles. Play the clip back to see the effect. Next, we'll animate the opacity of the clip. You can do this directly in the inspector by setting keyframes for opacity. However, it's much faster to do this right on the clip itself. Double-click on the opacity timing bar to expand it. You can adjust the overall opacity of the clip by dragging on the opacity line, or you can fade in or out the opacity by dragging on the fade handles that appear in the upper corners of the timing bar. Since the image begins off-screen, there's no point in fading in the clip. So drag the endpoint fade handle to the right until it's halfway between the end of the clip and the last keyframe. Now play the clip back to see the completed effect. Very nice. Next, we'll look at the various ways Final Cut Pro gives you for cropping an image.